Rome was quieter than I had ever heard it. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that hangs over ruins after the fire has already passed. They called this era the collapse of faith, though no one could agree on when it started. Some say it began when the last pope vanished without a body to bury. Others blamed the spreading miracles the Vatican could not explain. But I think it began long before that, the night humanity collectively stopped believing anyone was listening above. When belief dies, something else grows in the empty space it leaves behind. Fear, hunger, and for reasons we still do not understand, the weaker our faith became, the stronger the manifestations became. Not demons, never demons. We knew how to fight those. These were different. Wings of light cutting through the night sky. Choirs heard at dawn with no source to trace. Statues turning their heads toward people who prayed without conviction. Angels. Or something that wore the concept of angels like a mask. The Vatican needed a response, but nothing official. Nothing the world could point to and panic over. So they created the Order of St. Galerius, a division spoken of only in sealed rooms and shadowed corridors. We were not exorcists, though some of us used to be. We were not soldiers, though all of us were trained to kill. We were hunters. Angel hunters. Choir interceptors. The last firewall between humanity and whatever heaven was becoming. I was recruited because I had already seen what these beings could do. 8 months ago, during a routine exorcism in a small monastery north of Florence, something descended into the chapel. It did not break the door or shatter the stained glass. It simply appeared, as though the light around it had always contained a door we had never noticed. I remember the silence most of all. Not absence of sound but suppression, as if the world held its breath. The brothers beside me fell to their knees, weeping, not in awe. In agony, their prayers dissolved into choking cries. The angel did not speak. It did not need to. A single sweep of its wings carved through the chapel like a blade made of daylight. When it was over, the pews were drenched in blood and the walls glowed faintly, as if remembering the touch of something sacred and hostile. I survived only because the creature looked at me and, for a moment, hesitated. I still do not know why. The Vatican insisted it was a test, a marking. They covered up the massacre within 12 hours, sealed the ruins, burned the bodies, and placed me under the order's command. I was not given time to mourn. Tools do not mourn. 2 nights ago, they summoned me to the archives beneath St. Peter's and handed me a file bound in red twine. One name written on the cover: Azariel, a seraphim, a being of the higher choir. Not fallen, they said. There is no such thing as a fallen angel. Only one that defies the script heaven originally wrote for humanity. Azariel had been seen near the abandoned town of Saint Agnes, where 3 senior clerics were found dead, their faces burned away by light that left no flame. My mission was simple in wording and impossible in nature. Track the seraphim. Confirm its intentions. Eliminate it if required. They did not explain how one kills something made of the first light of creation. They only told me that Azariel must be stopped before more of heaven remembers what it was built for. I left Rome before dawn. Behind me, the bells of the city rang hollow, desperate, and unanswered. Rome was quieter than I had ever heard it. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that hangs over ruins after the fire has already passed. They called this era the collapse of faith, though no one could agree on when it started. Some say it began when the last pope vanished without a body to bury. Others blamed the spreading miracles the Vatican could not explain. But I think it began long before that, the night humanity collectively stopped believing anyone was listening above. When belief dies, something else grows in the empty space it leaves behind. Fear, hunger, and for reasons we still do not understand, the weaker our faith became, the stronger the manifestations became. Not demons, never demons. We knew how to fight those. These were different. Wings of light cutting through the night sky. Choirs heard at dawn with no source to trace. Statues turning their heads toward people who prayed without conviction. Angels. Or something that wore the concept of angels like a mask. The Vatican needed a response, but nothing official. Nothing the world could point to and panic over. So they created the Order of St. Galerius, a division spoken of only in sealed rooms and shadowed corridors. We were not exorcists, though some of us used to be. We were not soldiers, though all of us were trained to kill. We were hunters. Angel hunters, choir interceptors. The last firewall between humanity and whatever heaven was becoming. I was recruited because I had already seen what these beings could do. 8 months ago, during a routine exorcism in a small monastery north of Florence, something descended into the chapel. It did not break the door or shatter the stained glass. It simply appeared, as though the light around it had always contained a door we had never noticed. I remember the silence most of all, not absence of sound but suppression, as if the world held its breath. The brothers beside me fell to their knees, weeping. Not in awe, in agony, their prayers dissolved into choking cries. The angel did not speak. It did not need to. A single sweep of its wings carved through the chapel like a blade made of daylight. When it was over, the pews were drenched in blood, and the walls glowed faintly, as if remembering the touch of something sacred and hostile. I survived only because the creature looked at me and, for a moment, hesitated. I still do not know why. The Vatican insisted it was a test. A marking. They covered up the massacre within 12 hours, sealed the ruins, burned the bodies, and placed me under the order's command. I was not given time to mourn. Tools do not mourn. 2 nights ago, they summoned me to the archives beneath St. Peter's and handed me a file bound in red twine. One name written on the cover, Azariel, a seraphim, a being of the higher choir. Not fallen, they said. There is no such thing as a fallen angel, only one that defies the script heaven originally wrote for humanity. Azariel had been seen near the abandoned town of Saint Agnes, where 3 senior clerics were found dead, their faces burned away by light that left no flame. My mission was simple in wording and impossible in nature. Track the seraphim, confirm its intentions, eliminate it if required. They did not explain how one kills something made of the first light of creation. They only told me that Azariel must be stopped before more of heaven remembers what it was built for. I left Rome before dawn. Behind me, the bells of the city rang hollow, desperate, and unanswered. Saint Agnes lay at the edge of the Apennine Mountains like a half-finished prayer abandoned mid-sentence. From afar, the town looked untouched, as if simply sleeping under a blanket of mist. But the closer I drove, the clearer it became that something had peeled the life out of it, without disturbing the bodies that once held it. Storefronts still had chairs stacked inside. Laundry still hung from windows. Plates and silverware sat arranged neatly on tables, frozen in place like a photograph taken the second before a scream. The last census claimed nearly 3,000 people lived here. When I arrived, the only thing that greeted me was the wind scraping along the cobblestones, dragging with it a fine white dust that tasted faintly metallic on my tongue. It reminded me of the dust left behind after an exorcism gone wrong. Residual energy, burnt holiness, a wound that never truly scabs over. Locals from surrounding villages refused to enter Saint Agnes now. They whispered about lights blooming above the rooftops each evening, soft at first, then searing bright enough to stain the clouds crimson. Some reported hearing choirs drifting on the wind, hymns sung in voices layered so perfectly that no human throat could produce them. One farmer described seeing what looked like a pair of wings unfurl at the edge of the forest, vast, broken, and dripping a dark liquid, he insisted, was not blood. The man trembled as he spoke. Men do not tremble at lies they invent. I left the car near the town square and walked toward the church that dominated its center. St. Agnes Cathedral had once been a pilgrimage site, famed for a relic said to contain a feather from the Archangel Michael. I could not stop thinking about that relic now. Whether it had attracted the seraphim, or whether the relic had never been a relic at all. The cathedral doors were ajar. They groaned softly as I pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick and warm, far too warm for the season. A ripple of heat shimmered across the stained glass windows. When I approached one, I saw why. The glass had melted. Not shattered, not cracked. Melted. Colors sagged down the frames like wax from a candle, frozen mid-drip. I touched the surface and felt nothing, no warmth, no heat, just smoothness, as if whatever force had done this had burned so hot it no longer retained memory of fire. A soft sound made me pause. Tap, tap, tap. I looked down. Birds. Dozens of them scattered across the nave. Small sparrows and doves, all perfectly intact, yet bent forward in the position of kneeling, wings folded, heads bowed. As if praying, dead eyes stared at the altar. One feather drifted down from the rafters, spinning gently in the warm air. It landed at my feet. I picked it up. Slick, heavy, metallic. Not a feather at all, but a thin shard of something that felt more like bone. A movement echoed behind me. I spun around, hand instinctively reaching for the silver blade holstered beneath my coat. But there was no one there. Only shadows stretching across the floor, long and distorted by the warped sunlight filtering through the melted glass. Then I heard it. A voice. High, lilting, almost playful. Latin. Ancient Latin. Children. I followed the sound to a side chapel. Inside, 4 children, faces pale, clothes dusty, stood facing the wall, speaking in perfect rhythm. Their voices braided together, reciting phrases I recognized only from forbidden liturgical texts kept locked in Vatican archives. Lumina cadit. Vox ias revocat. Mortales dormient. Caeli redunt. Light descends. Its voice recalls. Mortals sleep. Heaven returns. I stepped closer, but before I could speak, all 4 children stopped. At the same time, as if a single thought had passed through a single mind controlling multiple bodies. Slowly they turned. Their eyes were white, not rolled back. Not blind, simply white, pure, empty, looking through me rather than at me. One of them lifted a hand and pointed toward the main altar. Angelus venit. The angel comes. Before I could question them, the children collapsed where they stood. Not violently, more like puppets with strings gently released. They were alive, breathing, but unresponsive. Their pulses were slow, too slow. I lifted one of the boys and carried him outside, laying him gently against the cathedral steps. The air there felt clearer, less oppressive. When I returned for the others, I saw movement inside the sacristy hallway. A silhouette. A woman. Her steps were soft, deliberate. She moved with the familiarity of someone who had lived in these halls for years. As she stepped into a shaft of light, I saw the habit around her shoulders, a nun's attire worn and frayed. Her hair was silver, cropped short. Her eyes were clouded white, blind. Yet she stopped precisely 3 steps in front of me, tilting her head slightly as if listening for something deeper than sound. "You are from Rome," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And you were sent to chase the one who sings above our roofs." "Azariel," I confirmed. At the name, a shiver passed through her. She clutched the rosary around her neck, not in prayer, but in fear. "You think it betrayed heaven?" Her voice trembled. "That is what they told you. Yes, the church, the order, yes." She shook her head slowly. "No, no, you do not understand. Angels do not betray." Her breath hitched like someone remembering a nightmare too vivid to recount fully. "They do not fall. They simply remember." "Remember what I asked?" She lifted her face toward the melted stained glass above us. "What heaven truly is." For a moment, neither of us spoke. A gust of wind swept through the cathedral, rattling the pews, making the melted tapestries ripple as though breathing. The nun's voice turned thin, almost breaking. "It does not come to punish us for our sins. No, it comes because we have forgotten. And heaven remembers everything." Her hands tightened around the rosary until her knuckles whitened. "Azariel has not abandoned his purpose. He has returned to it. The original purpose. The first command ever given." My heartbeat thudded. "And what command is that?" Her milky eyes lifted toward me, unseeing yet full of mourning. "To cleanse us." The air in the cathedral seemed to contract. Shadows deepened. The warm wind grew still. She whispered one last line, barely audible. It only spared me because I had already lost my sight. I could not witness its true form. The others they saw. And seeing is the first step toward unmaking. A chill climbed my spine. Before I could ask more, a sudden tremor shook dust from the rafters. The nun flinched and grasped my arm. "You must leave. Before nightfall. Before it sings again." "Where did it go?" I demanded. She slowly raised a trembling finger, pointing toward the forest behind Saint Agnes, where the mountains curved into a dark ravine. Back to the beginning. I followed her gaze, and for the first time I saw it. A faint glow tucked between the trees, something shifting, breathing, opening like a flower made of light and bone. Azariel was waiting, not hiding, waiting. I reached the rectory behind the cathedral as the sun dipped low behind the mountains. The light in Saint Agnes always felt wrong, as if filtered through something ancient and watching. Shadows stretched too far, angles bent subtly out of place. Even the silence had weight. Inside the rectory, dust coated every surface except a single oak table. On it lay a folder bearing the crimson seal of the Order of Saint Galerius. I recognized the mark immediately. It was the same symbol burned onto my shoulder the night I was initiated, the two intersecting circles, the broken halo, the inverted flame. I opened the folder. 7 sheets of vellum, handwritten, old, far older than the order itself. Each page detailed a single rule. 7 in total. The rules of choir interception. The ones every angel hunter was required to memorize. The ones I had never been allowed to see in full until now. Rule 1: never look directly at its wings. My breath caught as I read the note beneath. The wings of a seraphim are not ornaments. They are instruments of perception. They reflect the mind of the observer. A mortal looking upon them will see not beauty, but the full shape of their own corruption. This vision breaks the human psyche. Avoid eye contact at all costs. I remembered the monastery. Brothers clawing their own faces apart as the angel descended. They had not been killed by its light. They had been killed by themselves. I turned to the next sheet. Rule 2: if you hear hymns, cover your ears. They are commands. Angels do not speak as humans do. Their voices do not vibrate air. They vibrate intention. A hymn is a directive, a rewriting of the will. The notes bypass thought and sink directly into the soul. Below the rule was a scrawled annotation in faded ink. Do not listen even for a moment. Angels do not negotiate. They do not offer suggestions. They impose. I had heard rumors of hunters who obeyed without realizing it, who walked into fire, who stabbed their own hearts, who smiled as they died. I forced my hand to steady before turning to the 3rd page. Rule 3: a fallen angel does not cast a shadow. If you do not see a shadow, run. I froze. This was impossible. Every being casts a shadow. Every living body blocks light. But the parchment explained. Light recognizes its origin. A creature made of first light is not obstructive to illumination. Its form does not resist its own kind. And in smaller lettering, absence of shadow indicates proximity and attention. My pulse quickened. I remembered the melted stained glass windows, the children collapsing, the nun trembling. I remembered looking around the cathedral. Had I looked for a shadow? I swallowed hard and continued. Rule 4: holy water does nothing to them. This rule shook me more than I expected. Holy water is a sacramental designed to resist corruption. Angels are not corrupt. Their threat is purity, not impurity. They return the world to the state before sin, before will, before self. Human beings cannot survive purity. The note continued. Do not waste time or faith using water. Use blessed silver. Not to harm them, to mark their movement. Silver reveals their path by heat reaction. I felt the silver blade beneath my coat warm slightly, even though I hadn't touched it. The 5th page felt heavier than the rest. Rule 5: if it calls your birth name, do not answer. Your birth name is the soul's first anchor. The earliest shape God carved into your existence. To speak it aloud is to open the door inward. Angels do not ask permission. They enter through invitation. I exhaled slowly. My birth name was rarely spoken after childhood. Only my mother used it. And she had been dead for 20 years. If Azariel spoke it, I turned to the 6th page. Rule 6: angels do not lie, but they will not tell you the whole truth. A single annotation beneath this rule: deception is beneath them. Distortion is not. Angels speak in absolutes. If you ask whether they intend to kill you, they may answer no, because killing you is not the intention. Cleansing the world is. Your death is merely a consequence, not an objective. The 7th rule lay at the bottom of the stack. Its page was darker, stained by something like soot or ash. Rule 7: if Azariel opens his second pair of wings, it's already too late. Seraphim are described in Scripture as having 6 wings. But older texts ones buried by the church speak of something else. A hidden pair. A pair only unfurled when the divine purpose is invoked in full. This was not a rule. This was a warning. My fingertips tingled. The air seemed to thicken around me. I read the final note. When the second pair opens, the angel is no longer interacting. It is enacting. Do not attempt to fight. Do not attempt to speak. Even fleeing is futile. Only distance or darkness may slow its awareness, never stop it. The room felt colder now. No warmer. The temperature was rising slowly, like breath on glass or heat brushing against my neck. I turned. The rectory hallway stretched long and dark, illuminated only by the faint spill of red dusk through a cracked window. The shadows had lengthened unnaturally, reaching toward me across the floor. One of them belonged to me. The other did not. My heart stopped. The second shadow had no source. I stepped back, instantly clutching the silver blade. The edge burned faintly, reacting to something unseen. A faint hum drifted through the hallway. Not music. Not yet. Just a breath before a note. Marcus. The voice was soft, clear, perfect. It seemed to come from beside me, behind me, beneath the floorboards, from the rafters. Every direction at once. It said my name. Not the name I had given the church. My birth name. I clamped my hands over my ears on instinct, but the sound wasn't entering through them. It was entering through memory, through emotion, through the part of me that remembered my mother whispering it in the dark when storms shook the house. The rules hammered through my mind. Rule 5. Do not answer. Do not answer. Do not. Marcus Alighieri. The second time the voice shifted. Deeper, older, like someone who had once spoken the universe into being and had not forgotten the taste of that authority. I staggered backward into the nave of the broken cathedral. Dust fell from the rafters. The air pulsed. A hymn began, not loud, not melodic. A single note stretched impossibly long, as if eternity itself was exhaling. My vision blurred. Rule 2. Cover your ears. I pressed my palms against my skull, teeth clenched, fighting the urge to obey whatever command lay hidden beneath that tone. The candles along the altar, long melted and cracked, suddenly flared to life, igniting without flame. Light bled upward across the pillars, and then I saw it. A silhouette standing at the far end of the cathedral. Tall, motionless, wings folded behind it like shapes carved from dawn. No shadow. None. It stepped forward. The light did not change. The air did. Azariel did not walk. It arrived. Each step was not a movement, but a relocation, as if the space between here and there simply ceased to exist for it. When it spoke, the world quieted. You were chosen, Marcus. The voice unfurled like a banner of living light, brushing against the walls, sinking into my bones. Not by the church. Its wings shifted. The air liquefied. Heat rippled. My knees buckled, but by heaven. Azariel stood only a few paces away now, though I had never seen it move. Its presence forced the cathedral to kneel around us. Wood groaned, stone bowed, air trembled. I dared not look at the wings. Rule 1. But I felt them. Like eyes. Like judgment. Like the memory of creation settling onto my shoulders. You survived the monastery, Azariel continued. You saw the threshold. You felt the resonance. You remember. My throat tightened. I remembered. The hesitation. The moment it spared me. The feeling of something vast choosing. Azariel tilted its head, studying me with a softness too precise to be human. You were marked that day, not by chance, not by mercy. The hymn deepened. You were marked because you belonged to us. The cathedral cracked. Light spilled from the fissures in the walls. My vision darkened at the edges. My blood hummed. Rule 6 pulsed through my mind. Angels do not lie. I don't, I whispered, barely able to breathe. Azariel leaned closer, voice like a son being born. You do. Behind it something unfurled, a second pair of wings. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know the meaning of Rule 7. My pulse stopped. Azariel's face lowered until it hovered inches from mine, expression unreadable. Do not fear, Marcus, it murmured. You were never meant to hunt us. Its eyes opened, and the cathedral exploded with light. The world reassembled around me in fragments of blinding white. For several seconds I could not tell whether I was on my feet, on my knees, or floating somewhere between life and death. The blast of Azariel's light had not burned me, but it had unmade something inside me, like a hand had reached into my chest and rearranged the parts that made me human. When I finally managed to steady myself, the cathedral no longer resembled a structure built by men. Stone pillars sagged like softened wax. Wooden pews bent under their own weight as if gravity had thickened. The tiles beneath me had been stripped of color, entirely bleached into a bone-white smoothness that hurt to look at. Azariel stood at the center of it, all untouched by the devastation. Light clung to it, not as illumination but as obedience, bending around its body like a living veil. The air around the seraphim shimmered with heat, but not earthly heat, more like the temperature of an idea too pure to exist on earth. "Marcus," it said, and the sound arrived inside me before my ears processed anything. "You persist. That is good." I staggered upright, every muscle shaking from the shockwave. "You are destroying everything I managed." Azariel tilted its head, the motion both gentle and impossibly precise. "No. This place is only returning to what it was before men shaped it with hands unworthy of the task." A low hum rolled through the cathedral walls like a distant avalanche. I heard glass crack behind me, small windows giving in to the vibrations of a hymn forming somewhere above the threshold of sound. "You still misunderstand," Azariel continued. "I am not the exile. Heaven's will has not faltered." My breath stilled. "Then why did they call you fallen?" Azariel stepped forward. The floor warped beneath its feet. "Because heaven has changed." The words struck like a hammer. "Changed," I repeated, barely audible. "The Maker grows silent. Human noise has drowned the prayer of the world. When creation rots, the source must intervene." "You are saying God?" "Yes," Azariel answered calmly. "The command has been given. The world will be cleansed. Humanity has become an echo of itself, hollow and adrift. War, corruption, greed, despair. You know this. You have seen it." Images flashed inside my memory, the monastery, the bodies, the terror carved into their faces. But beneath that a warmth that frightened me more than the deaths themselves. "You still do not understand," Azariel said. "Let me show you." The cathedral groaned as Azariel raised a hand. Not in threat, in invitation. The air thickened with memory. My memory, except not entirely mine. Images of a woman whose face I half remembered. A voice calling a name no one had spoken in decades. Light watching me with something like parental patience. "No," I whispered. "Stop. You were not abandoned, Marcus," Azariel said. "You were placed." A cold pressure filled my chest. "What are you saying? You are Nephilim." I froze. "No. That is impossible." "You survived the monastery," Azariel said. "You touched my presence and remained whole. You withstand radiance no human could survive. Did you never wonder why my hands shook violently? My heartbeat pounded like a fist against my ribs." "The Vatican knew," Azariel continued. "They took you as a child, trained you, molded you, not to save humanity, to use you. A weapon born from a union they refused to acknowledge." The truth landed inside me with crushing clarity. "They raised you to fight us," Azariel said. "But you were never meant to be their blade." The hymn intensified. Stained glass liquefied and slid down the walls like molten jewels. My pulse thundered against my skull. Azariel unfurled its wings, slightly, not fully, but enough for the air to buckle. Even half open, they radiated brilliance that made my vision tremble. "Come with me, Marcus," it said softly. "Stand with your true kin. Heaven will descend upon this world. But you have a place among us." A wind spiraled around my feet, lifting dust like rising spirits. The light pulsed, beckoning. For a moment I felt myself lean toward it, a longing older than my own existence. Azariel extended a hand. "Join me." The world hushed, waiting for my answer. I stepped back. "No." Azariel did not move. The light around it dimmed as if disappointment had weight. "You choose mortality," it said. "Flawed, temporary, afraid." "I choose humanity," I said through clenched teeth. A sigh spread through the cathedral, a sigh large enough to collapse stars. "Then you choose suffering." Azariel's wings snapped outward. I did not see the motion. I only felt it, a wall of force like a collapsing monument. My body flew backward, struck a column, and crumpled onto the stone. Agony ripped through every nerve. Blood filled my mouth. Azariel lowered its wings, and the world rippled around it. "You cannot kill me," I said, barely upright. "No," Azariel replied. "You will kill yourself trying to resist what you are." It turned slightly light, gathering beneath its feet, like liquid dawn. "Your defiance delays nothing. Heaven has already begun its descent." The roof peeled away as if invisible hands were tearing it open. Night poured in, but it was not true night. Pale currents of radiance twisted through the darkness like silent lightning across a black ocean. Azariel looked upward, wings folding with terrible grace. "I will return when the sky opens. And when that moment arrives, you will stand with me." It paused. "Or you will be swept away with the rest." The seraphim ascended. Not with motion, but with transition. One instant it was there, the next only a column of shivering air marked its rise. The ceiling cracked, stones raining around me like pieces of a collapsing world. Then Azariel was gone, swallowed by the dark sky above St. Agnes. Silence settled. My lungs burned. My vision pulsed. Something inside my chest felt cracked, not physically but fundamentally. Azariel had spared me. Deliberately. Not because I was human, but because I was not. I lay on the ruined floor, staring at the fractured heavens, and understood one truth with absolute clarity: this was not the end. This was the beginning. I wrote the report in a rented room above a shuttered bakery on the outskirts of Rome. My hands trembled the entire time. Not from fear, but from the weight of knowing the truth would never reach the people who needed it most. Azariel escaped. Heaven is preparing something. The hymns grow louder each night. Those were the first 3 lines. Simple, clinical, but each word felt like carving a confession into stone. I added details where protocol demanded, but nothing I wrote could capture the feeling of standing beneath wings that did not belong to this world. Nothing could explain the certainty that the sky itself had begun to turn against us. When the report was finished, I sealed it and left it at the designated drop point behind the basilica. I did not wait for acknowledgement. I had no reason to. Vatican would not accept what I witnessed. They would dissect my words, polish them, bury them, twist them into something useful for their own survival. I turned in my badge at dawn. A simple act, almost quiet. No goodbyes. No ritual. The Order of St. Galerius had never been a family. It had been a cage someone convinced me was holy. My train out of the city left just past midnight. I bought a one-way ticket without looking at the destination. Anywhere was acceptable, as long as it was away from Rome, away from the hymns echoing in the cathedrals, away from the eyes carved into the stone saints that now felt like they were watching for something other than salvation. The train rocked gently as it pulled into the countryside. Rain streaked the windows. I pressed a hand to the glass, feeling the vibration of distant thunder, or perhaps something deeper. Something humming beneath the surface of the world. I told myself I was leaving the war behind. That I was choosing a quieter fate. That I was still human enough to pretend I could live a normal life. Then the lights in the carriage flickered. Just once. Then again. I felt the temperature shift before I heard anything. The air thickened like fog pressing against my face. A faint glow moved in the aisle, reflected in the window. I stared at the glass first because I was afraid to turn around. There was a man sitting next to me. I had not heard him approach. Had not felt the seat dip. One moment the spot was empty. The next it was filled by a presence that seemed too still, too composed. He wore a white cloak draped neatly across his shoulders. The fabric looked untouched by weather or dirt or time. Pure in a way nothing on earth should be. I looked down. He had no shadow. My breath locked in my throat. He tilted his head slightly as if examining something familiar. His eyes were calm, pale, and depthless, like polished stone smoothed by centuries of water. "Marcus," he whispered. My name sounded wrong in his voice. Too clear. Too old. Like someone speaking a memory I had forgotten I once owned. "Do you remember your true name?" Every muscle in my body tightened. My fingers dug into the armrest until it creaked. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. The train rattled along the tracks, but all other sound had faded. Even the wheels seemed to fall silent. The lights overhead went out, one by one. Darkness swallowed the carriage. Then a faint vibration moved through the metal frame of the train. Not mechanical, not natural. A hymn, soft at first, then spiraling upward into something far too harmonious to be human. The note slid across my skin like cold water. My lungs refused to obey. My vision pulsed at the edges. The man in white leaned closer. I could not see his face now, only the suggestion of light bending around features too precise to belong to flesh. "Marcus," he breathed again. The world trembled around the sound. "You cannot run from what you are." The hymn rose higher. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound went straight through bone, straight through memory, straight into the part of me. Azariel had awakened. The train shuddered as if the steel itself were afraid. Everything inside me, every instinct screamed to flee, to leap off the train, to abandon this world entirely. But I sat frozen, because deep down some quiet, terrible part of me recognized the voice calling to me. The darkness thickened, the hymn sharpened. The man in white smiled, and the last thing I saw before the world dissolved into sound was a faint glimmer of wings unfolding slowly behind him. Waiting.